George Babelitz, the German expressionist artist, when asked why women were so poorly represented in museums and art galleries, retorted that women can't paint, hence the title of the talk and exhibition and the catalogue. I would have to say it's entirely true about myself. However, I do have enormous respect for many female artists, many of whom are here, actually. There's a few in the audience, so it'd be nice to hear from you later on. Hi. The exhibition's fantastic. Don't miss it. You do have to climb stairs, but it's great cardio. Alice, when you researched and curated the fantastic exhibition, Modern Scottish Women, Painters and Sculptors, 1885 to 1965 for the Modern Art Gallery, did you find that there was this prevalent belief during those years that indeed women were really rather incapable of executing decent painting?
Well, there's a classic moment in Scottish art history in 1885 when Joyce's predecessor as president of the Royal Scottish Academy, William Fettes Douglas, declared that the work of a woman artist was like that of a man's, only weaker and poorer. But in the same year, an amazing chap called Fra Newbery was appointed director of Glasgow School of Art and really turned it into a leading institution in terms of its female staff and its female students. So you see, you know, these polarizing events happening in Scotland in 1885. And there is no doubt that women faced challenges that male artists didn't in being allowed to train, the training they received in being able to practice as artists, and how their work was perceived. But I like to think of it as a glass half full, otherwise we'd all get a bit depressed.
We will hear from you later, though, about some of the impediments that female artists did have to face. Joyce, damned by Baselitz before you start. I need to ask you, is he a half-decent painter?
Well, the first time I was aware of Baselitz was in 1982, I think it was, when there was a show in the Royal Academy in London called The New Spirit in Painting, where the first time, I think, in Britain, we were kind of introduced to people like Baselitz and Lupertz. And I have to say, at that time, I wasn't really very impressed. But to talk about his remark that he made about women artists, he actually qualified it and said that Agnes Martin was an okay painter, as was Paula Morrison Becker. So he was a very kind of aggressive painter. So I'm not surprised that he made that remark. But actually, I have a friend in Berlin who studied under Baselitz, and she found him really quite exciting to work with. And he actually bought some of her work. So I think it was made as a bravado statement. They're all big guys. And somebody like Lupertz, who was also in that exhibition, said to the late Professor Alan Robb, who was head of fine art at Dundee College of Art, when Alan was talking to him about how many professorships he had, he said, "How do you manage it to get round them?" And he said, "It is enough that they see me in the corridors and sense my greatness." So that is very much the attitude of these. That was 40 years ago, because I think Baselitz now in his 80s.
80s,
so
yeah. 83, I think.
83, yes. So I think that's all been modified. But I just don't give any credence to these remarks. It makes them important if you do give them any credence. It was, especially the Fettes Douglas, was of its time. It was in every walk of life, in medicine, etc., etc. So, you can't kind of isolate it from the rest of society.
Andrew, one of the artists that you chose to feature in this exhibition, Margaret Hunter, also worked with him and found him to be quite supportive, but clearly he still had a rather enormous ego. What was it that propelled you to create this exhibition, which is called Women Can Paint?
Well, as I say in the catalogue, actually, it began before the Baselitz quote. And I'm not giving Baselitz credence, because what I was doing is actually riposting him and proving he was completely wrong in that quote. And also, I might say that Margaret Hunter, who studied under him, remembered the fact that Baselitz, a few years before he said women can't paint, he said to enormous furor and great press coverage, East German artists can't paint. So he had a history of contentious remarks. But this whole idea began actually for me in the 1980s over a bottle of tequila with the American feminist artist, she of the dinner party fame, Judy Chicago, at her ranch in Santa Fe, where she said to me that at that point, half the graduates of American art colleges were women, yet only 8%, but she'd just done an account on it, an audit, only 8% of exhibiting artists in serious, of women in serious exhibitions and major museums, only 8% were women. And as for published writings in the 80s, only 1% of published writings in art were about women. And that is what started me thinking about it. And when I got back to Scotland and I checked the history of the 369 Gallery the previous 10 years, I discovered that I had inadvertently shown possibly more than 50%, certainly at least equal, and possibly a fraction more women than men. And this whole series of films and exhibitions was to try and find out for myself, you know, why that happened, why I had gone so much against the tide.
The catalogue is free, by the way, and definitely worth getting. The cover picture is actually by Joyce. What's the picture called again, Joyce? I can't remember.
Pusser's Rum.
Okay, just tell us very quickly what it means, because Joyce is very much a storyteller in her art.
Yeah. Well, it started off, I think I found this leaflet. I think it might have been in one of the kind of war museums in Portsmouth. And it was how to look after your cats, your animals in wartime. And the advice was really, because they didn't know what was going to happen, that it would be advisable to really put them down rather than keep them going during the war, because of all the other things that would be necessary to keep the country going. And I found that really, you know, being a huge cat lover, would never have been able to do that to my cats. Yeah. And some the artifacts, again, Pusser's Rum, there's the naval reference, there's a little jar of Russian caviar, an oxotin. Anything I put in the paintings has to be relevant to the period of time that I'm painting about. So I research that in museums all over Europe and in Tunisia to find things that I want that are relevant to the story that I'm telling at the time. It's my only way of connecting because I wasn't there. So I don't really do what you call war paintings. They're memorials to things that happened and, you know, relate to them through the objects.
But Joyce, don't you think also it's incredibly appropriate that this picture's on show now, considering what's just happened in, if you've been seeing in the news, in Kabul, where there was this huge discussion on whether a plane should be chartered to bring out people's pets. And in the end, of course, it was a question of pets rather than animals. It's exactly the same sort of story. And I think you told me 400,000 family pets were put down during the First World War.
Yeah, I can't quite remember. I'm not good at remembering things.
But I think it was 400,000.
Yeah, yeah.
And Andrew, in the catalogue, you say that you have always admired the tenacity of female artists to carry on, despite, and I quote you, overwhelming odds. I think it'd be quite interesting to hear from women artists if they feel that the odds are particularly overwhelming. But what gave you that impression?
Actually, it was pointed out to me, if it was overwhelming odds, they couldn't actually overcome them. So I've changed it to almost or near overwhelming odds, I think, in the last paragraph. And well, it was just extraordinary that just for the simple thing, even in the 80s, it was still a man's world. And Fiona Carlyle points out that when she was in her final year and she was asked by tutors what she was going to do afterwards, she said paint, and they were really surprised. And then earlier on in her first year, someone said to her, one of the tutors said to her, goodness, you can paint almost as well as a man. So, I mean, certainly in the 80s, those attitudes were there. And the fact that in Edinburgh College of Art, which I attended in the 70s, along with Fiona, we could count Elizabeth Blackadder, sadly recently departed, and Victoria Crowe, and I think the wife of the owner of the Scottish Gallery, and Thora Klein perhaps as well, there were about 4 out of 20 women tutors. And I think Joyce has said that in Dundee there were none.
No, there
So when
weren't.
I interviewed Elizabeth Blackadder a couple of times, and I remember her saying, because I was asking her whether or not she felt it was more difficult to become a successful female artist, and she just looked at me like I was from Mars and said, no, it's not difficult. And she said that her most terrifying tutor when she was training was Penelope Beaton, whereas Gillis had been gentle as a lamb, but she'd been the one who was really quite formidable.
But the other thing I would say, Edi, is that, and it's research I'm going to do in the next month with the help of Callum, so he's hearing it first here, to see what the percentage of female tutors are now in the 4 Scottish art colleges. I'm sure it will be better, but I'm not sure how much better, because Hilary Robinson, the feminist academic in England, who's leading feminist art academic, who's been advising me on this, has been doing her research, and she says now it's not 8% of people of exhibitors were women, but it's still under 30%. It's nearer 24 or 25. So things are undoubtedly better than 40 years ago, but there's no equality as yet. So women do have to struggle harder than men.
Alice, I'm going to ask you to put your glass half full down for a minute and tell us a little bit about the historical context of women in the past and how difficult it was for them in training and indeed to be a practicing artist, because the odds were almost overwhelming.
There are 2 things that stand out particularly to me, and that was access to the life class, which is where you would study a live model, often in the nude, of male or female gender, and the skillful representation of the human body was considered the bedrock of becoming a professional artist. And yet female artists were forbidden access to the life class because it was considered morally degrading that they see a naked body. And Kathleen Scott Kennett, the sculptor, took matters into her own hands and went to study at the Académie Colarossi in Paris, where the French allowed women into the life class. And at her first exposure to a male model, went to the lavatory and vomited. But we see...
I can understand that, actually.
We see Glasgow School of Art leading the way. They have a segregated life class for female students available from, I think, 1901. And it arrives at Edinburgh College of Art in 1912, albeit in its own classroom and chaperoned. So that's a key difference in the training. But also...
And also Joan Eardley, when she did the male nude, there was a great furore about that as well, wasn't
That's
there?
right. So Joan Eardley, whose centenary year is celebrating this year, painted her friend, the painter Angus Neal, in a work called Sleeping Nude from 1955, showed it in the Society of Scottish Artists exhibition in Edinburgh that year. And it caused a furore because how dare a woman artist paint a naked man, despite the fact that the other way around had been done for centuries. This was considered absolutely beyond the pale, and she never showed that work in public thereafter.
And can I interrupt as well? Because when Fiona Carlyle did a life-sized, very tasteful watercolour nude painting of her husband Alpin, and it was shown in the RSA in the mid-80s, the hanging committee was so frightened of it, it had to be round a corner behind pillars so that you had to really struggle to get to see it. And that was in the 1980s. So it hadn't changed that much.
Which for us is actually very recent.
Yes.
Well, that's the point, because the Glasgow Arts Club and the Scottish Arts Club in Edinburgh, I don't know if anyone wants to take a guess when they first admitted female members. They were both founded in the third quarter of the 19th century. Any idea when they admitted women? 1982 and 1983.
Yesterday.
Well, the Scottish Art Club, which I was a member of in Edinburgh, my professor of art history at university proposed that women should be allowed to become members. And this would have been in the mid-80s. And I remember I seconded it with him. And we had 2 very Doughty, an Edinburgh councillor, Bailey, somebody, and a lawyer, who were very against it. Our argument was that Elizabeth Blackadder, Anne Redpath, and Joan Aidley were undoubtedly as good, if not better, than their male counterparts. So it was a ridiculous argument that women should not be allowed to join the club. And their argument seemed to be all about plumbing, that to have separate toilets for women would be a massive cost. We won, I may say. But and that was again in the mid-80s.
Yeah.
Another great impediment, though, for female artists was that if they got married, I mean, Joyce has been married how many times, Joyce? You would have had to give up teaching, wouldn't you?
Yes. Well, I know that my present husband, who's the third one, his both his mother and father were doctors in the Southern General in Glasgow, and when they got married, she had to give up her job. So it wasn't just in the arts that this happened. And so she ended up as a visiting schools doctor. She wasn't considered, high enough, to go and serve. But I know when I got interviewed for the job at Gray's School of Art, one of the interviewing panel said to me, he said, "And what about children? You've just got recently married." That was the first husband. Who I was giving up after a year. But anyway, and I said, look, I would not have applied for this job if I was considering to have children. But you also got things when I was interviewed for the Royal College of Art. I think it was Sir Roger de Grey said to me, he said, "Do you like dancing?" I looked at him and I said, "Well, it depends who with." I think that's what got me the job. I was a bit cheeky then. I was just going to say, Alice, you've got all the facts and figures here, but I printed them out. The first woman associate elected to the RSA was in 1938, and that was Josephine Haswell Miller. And the first person in 1944 elected as a full member was Phyllis Bone, who was a sculptor. And in 1952, the first woman painter elected RSA was Anne Redpath in 1952. So I presume these are okay.
Yes, absolutely. And Redpath, a wonderful borders artist, as I'm sure that you're aware of. But what Joyce doesn't continue to say is that she herself is a pioneer, having been elected the first female president of the Royal Scottish Academy.
That's right. And
sometimes she wishes that she hadn't been.
Yeah, well, I have to say that it was not a goal that I'd ever considered in my life. And my association to the Royal Scottish Academy went right back to 1963, when as a schoolgirl, I saw the Soutine and Modigliani exhibition. And I was absolutely bowled over by that. And I would spend my pocket money to go and visit the RSA summer exhibitions as they were then. I managed to get through my O-level in higher English by manipulating the questions of visit to an exhibition each year, the same one. I don't know if the same examiner checked it and would mark me down. But at that point, I had no idea what it was all about. I mean, I didn't know about presidents or anything like that. And then I think it's been, as it is now, I was supported by the Academy indirectly. I went to Hospital Field Summer School in my third year, and was given the Hospital Field Prize by the Royal Scottish Academy. And then I got the Carnegie Travelling Scholarship when I was in my fourth year, or was it my postgrad year, which was then the top prize. I think it was £150, which would be a lot of money then. And that allowed me to go to Italy for the whole summer. So the RSA, as it does now, through its awards and scholarships, and they have no government funding, the main thing and the best thing, and why I'm proud to be part of it, is what we do for young people and the kind of generational continuing thing that happens from year to year, where it doesn't matter what age you are in the academy. You can be 90 and still have a great conversation with someone who's just been elected. There's no barrier about age in art, I don't think.
But the other thing you said, Joyce, that is most interesting, again, for this research and this project on the films, is that since you've been there and for a few years before, most of the prizes have been going to women rather than men, without any positive discrimination.
No. I mean, everything is judged on quality of work, not on gender, ethnicity, or anything apart from the quality of work. And I know when I'm looking at people, who've submitted applications for awards, I never look at who they are and think, in the first trawl, because there's usually an awful lot, like say for the Kinross scholarships to Italy, where we award 10 scholarships. There's 174. I usually go through them all very quickly, and you can knock out ones you think, oh, that work's not up to really, and I don't know what on earth why they want to go to Florence. I couldn't see what it would give to them, and it's kind of some kind of installation-y thing. So it's only later. I don't mean that as an insult, because some of the things you think they don't really even mention Florence in the application, or they'll say, oh, I want to go to Florence because it was the scene of the Renaissance. And there's just nothing, whereas others will really get excited and say, oh, I really want to go to the Science Museum. Or there was an architect who wanted to study the ancient sewers under Florence. And you think, well, that's exciting. That's a different take, So that's how I see it. And it's only towards the end when you're looking at them more closely, and you look much more closely about what they want to do when they're there, that you suddenly think, oh, you actually notice that it's, a woman or a man, but that makes absolutely no difference. It's always about how good the work is.
You were saying there, Joyce, about being asked at an interview if you were going to have children. And I think it'd be true to say, wouldn't it? Well, Anne Redpath is a bit of an exception, but most female artists who were successful didn't have children. I'm thinking about, Frances Walker, who's just turned 91, no children. Elizabeth Blackadder, no children. Sylvia Wishart, no children. Would that be true to say?
Or also no husbands. I mean, we do see artists like Beatrice Huntington and Hazel Armour, who had to put their careers to one side to nurse husbands who were ill for a long time, or had to play second fiddle to their artist husband's career. Agnes Miller Parker is sort of dismissed as Mrs. William McCants for a time. So I would hate to advise any women art students, don't get married, don't have children, but the statistics would rather lead you to believe that helps.
But we do have a couple here still, Lise Hansen and Sheila Mullen, who have had children and have managed to survive. And I think maybe, as Sheila said, not despite it, because Sheila said that she considered having children part of her creativity.
So did Anne Redpath.
And I was going to say that Redpath is the other example, because I remember, because Redpath's family were very friendly with Caroline McNairn's family, and I remember hearing stories that Caroline McNairn's aunt lived for a short time with Anne Redpath, and once the children were bathed and put to bed, and before anything else was done, Anne would simply take up a sketchbook and things and draw the detritus that had been left. And that's that marvelous painting in the Gallery of Modern Art of the Indian rug with the children's slippers and the bath towel against the red chair. So she actually used it as much as she could to her advantage.
But nevertheless, I mean, there's no argument about it. There are very few women from the past that we can all name, really. Why is it that there's still no legacy, really? I mean, when you did this, I'm sure you had to work quite hard to find out about the women.
Well, on a personal note, I think doing the Modern Scottish Women exhibition was the first time that being a part-time working mother myself counted in my professional favour, gave me some sort of credibility as its curator. Sorry, repeat the question.
Oh God, that means I'll have to remember it. I was just asking, why don't we have more famous female artists from the past, or indeed from the era that you were studying here?
So one of the issues is a short career and therefore a relatively small body of work. So if, like Dorothy Johnston, who had to stop teaching at Edinburgh College of Art when she married her colleague in 1924 because of the marriage bar, that goes on to have children, does carry on working, but not to the extent that she had at Edinburgh College of Art, and therefore has a relatively short period when she's creating at the top of her powers. And so you don't have the 80 to 100 works that you might require for a major solo exhibition, as a lot of galleries are programmed these days. The other thing is a simple matter of names, because an artist...
Because they changed their name.
A woman artist can start her career showing under her maiden name. she can then possibly take her husband's name when she marries. And then there's a Scottish thing, a lot of women are given their mother's maiden name or their maternal grandmother's maiden name as their middle name. So someone like Nora Nielsen Gray. And from an academic point of view, she might be under Nielsen or under Gray or Nielsen Gray. And so a woman artist can have more than one professional identity, which makes it that much more harder to trace her career and therefore give her the full professional credit that she is due.
What about subject matter that female artists chose? I mean, I know that there was a kind of hierarchy of which genre you were supposed to be in. You were allowed to do, craft, but painting and sculpture were much much more uncommon for people to be recognised in. But I loved the film with Fiona Carlyle when she said, drawing is seeing. And I suppose you could argue that women see the world differently. So do they paint the world differently? I mean, Joyce, you're an example of that. You draw what you see all the time.
Well, I do, but it's not as simple as that. I mean, some women like Elizabeth Blackadder would just say, when people asked her the meaning of her work, oh, it's just an old jug I found around the house. She didn't want to go into it. And sometimes it's quite private and it's different. But, would you call Adrian Wisniewski a male painter, with his kind of beautiful boys and flowers and things? I think there are obviously some painters that look obviously more male, but then there's some female artists who are really exuberant and could equally, I don't think really that nowadays that gender comes into it.
But there were women in the past who were considered to be, really, beyond what they should be doing. Bloody Mary is one that you were telling me about the other day.
Mary Cameron's marvellous. She's, she grew up in Edinburgh, had studios in Edinburgh and Madrid. And she very famously painted military scenes and bullfights, Spanish bullfights, and therefore was christened Bloody Mary. But there was even a hierarchy within the genres. So there was a feminine accomplishment in being able to paint pretty watercolours of flowers. Painting what came next, that was just about acceptable. But to be a female sculptor, at least in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was beyond the pale because it was the most physical, exertive form of art that you could pursue. And so a lot of women sculptors at that time would exhibit anonymously or just under their initials so that their work wouldn't be prejudged as simply inappropriate for a woman creator.
Now, I've just been able to read the sign at the back, which says questions. So would anybody like to ask questions of the panel? There's a microphone somewhere. There's a gentleman here and there's a lady over there. Here.
First. Thank you, that was really interesting. Just touching on your point, Edi, about the subject matter difference, if there is such a thing. I wanted to ask Andrew if during that time with the 30 or 40% women at the 369, did you discern any difference in the painterliness or in the subject matter, the content, the technique in the paintings that you were showing?
That's an interesting question. It was 50 or 60%, not 30 or 40. Not really, I would say. If it was a question of strength, as Fiona Carlyle said, when she was at college, she was given the compliment that she painted like a man, meant to be a compliment. So I think not really. They were all very strong painters, and I can think of one or two of the male painters who occasionally painted a still life with flowers in it or a thing with flowers. So not really. I think subject matter isn't the difference isn't that. For me, what made in retrospect, the female paintings more powerful, deeper, more meaningful for me is that I could see in their work that they had gone through more of a struggle to get there, that they really had not had it as easily as the male painters. And because of that, I'm thinking of someone like Carol Gibbons, you know, who worked away for years and was ignored and then produced marvelously subtle, she always said that her important thing was touch, not just brushstrokes. It was just a touch of the painting. And they're strong as any, subtle, but strong as any painting produced by Stephen Campbell or any of, and famously, she was in a conversation once with John Bellany. John Bellany said to her as a compliment, he said, you know, you are the greatest living Scottish woman artist. And she said to him, leave out the woman bit. And I can honestly say I would rather have, as I do, a Carol Gibbons on my wall than a John Bellany any day.
I've just been to the Hunterian exhibition of Whistlers and found that some of his wife's, particularly bird paintings, had been attributed to him. And that made me wonder, does that happen historically? Was that quite a common thing, or is that unusual?
Alice?
Well, I think one of the things that people would like to unravel, for example, is the relationship between Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his wife, Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh. Because I think he famously said, I'm an artist, but it's Margaret who's a genius. And when they worked together on interior schemes, I mean, she is now credited with these beautiful panels, but we actually think that she was more involved. It was more of a collaboration than we really know. It's just going to take some digging to try and prove that. So you do see people like the sculptor Gertrude Alice Meredith Williams, who worked on Paisley's War Memorial with Robert Lorimer, based on sketches by her husband, Maurice Meredith Williams. So you do see a lot of artist couples who work very well two-way.
Yeah. And another example would be, of course, Joan Erdley and her partner and lover, Lil Nielsen, who, after Erdley's death, Lil was locked out of her cottage. And she was so grief-stricken, having nursed her through her last illness, that she didn't go back to collect a lot of her own paintings. And they'd worked together. And I went round the big Erdley exhibition in the 1980s with Lil Nielsen and her other great friend who had taken Erdley to Cataline, Annette Stevens. And Annette was saying, it's so nice that so many of your paintings have been included in this exhibition. So it's not just, you know, with men and women, it was women and women as well.
I think there's a gentleman at the back who, yes. Come to you next.
I just wanted to ask a question about artworks. Is it possible to fully appreciate a piece of art or design or a piece of music, fully appreciate it without knowing the gender of the person who made it?
Absolutely, I think. I don't think that's a kind of thing that I can answer really, but yes, you know, you look at something and you don't think, is it a male or a female? Is it a wonderful piece of art? And it's just what I was describing when we're looking at judging art for awards and also judging people who are going to be elected to the Academy. You don't think, is this a man or a woman? And in fact, in the, you know, I know there was a few years ago, there was a kind of definite push from somebody in the Academy to say, this year we should elect more female artists. And I know that Barbara Ray, Elizabeth Blackadder and myself said absolutely no. Whatever we do, it always has to be about the quality of the art, and we can't actually manufacture this. And I mean, because of the way it was, we're still playing catch up, but things since 2010 have really opened up amazingly. So no, I don't think, I think you can appreciate anything,
of course,
for its beauty without.
But gender is becoming an increasingly very old-fashioned concept.
Yes, it is.
Isn't it?
Well, I was going to come back to that question. I would flip it as a curator as opposed to an artist. Would a male viewer of a work of art respond to a painting differently to a female viewer standing beside them looking at the same work? But also your point, Edi, of course, it is increasingly becoming outdated to define yourself as male or female.
Yeah, and I would say all the artists, the 7 artists in the films, the 8th one would have been Elizabeth Blackadder. Sadly, she was too ill to be filmed. All 7 of them have said that when they are painting, they now don't consider themselves male or female. They simply consider themselves an artist. And I think that is crucial. Every single one has said that independently. But also, on that question of being confused about things, Pat Doothwaite used to get, who you'd think is the most quintessentially strong female artist because of her pictures are all about great female icons like Theda Bara, Amy Johnson, Cattle Kate, who was a bandit, all these sort of things. She used to get letters addressed to her, "Dear Mr. Doothwaite." So because she was always Pat rather than Patricia.
One more question I've promised here, and then I'm afraid we're out of time. So,
Yeah, Edie over here.
no, I promised this. Sorry, well, hopefully you'll be able to speak to each other afterwards, because nobody's going away, I don't think.
I've listened very carefully to all you've said, but it strikes me with the recent publication of the book, The Authority Gap by Marianne Sigard, and I'm interviewing her in a week or two, that actually this authority issue by men is almost irrespective of professional discipline and is sadly rather too ongoing. And I wonder whether in your lives you have ever discussed it with people in different disciplines, the better to campaign against it, perhaps.
Well, I think that's your argument, isn't it, Joyce? When you look at the, I have to say, rather lamentable history of the RSA and the number of women, you're saying, well, actually, that was bound by the times.
It was bound by the times, yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is not lamentable, I must insist, anymore. Really, it's very much more progressive, and it is about the future of young people. But no, I get your point. When I go on these processions from St. Giles with all the learned societies, and you look around and everybody in their wonderful ceremonial robes, there's still very few women in any of these societies who are representing whatever it is. So I think, yes, we do have a way to go, and there is no doubt.
I would say that's one of the reasons that I proposed to Creative Scotland this series of films and this exhibition, to show that these artists have been, some of them overlooked much more than they should have been. They've all had a certain degree of success, but it's been more difficult for them. And I'm hoping in future that it's going to be easier for the female art students coming out.
Yeah.
Because after all, one of the things Fiona Carlyle also said is that when asked about how she was going to have a career after art school, the only gallery really in Edinburgh that was before the 369 that was seriously showing, commercially showing Scottish artists was the Scottish Gallery. And nearly everyone who exhibited there had been a lecturer in a Scottish art college. And of course, there was no chance for the women to get a job in a Scottish art. I mean, Joyce was rare, and that still seems to be the case. And we have to change it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about earlier about how it was in art school. I always seemed to get on absolutely okay, but as soon as you got a bit of success, which I did in my 3rd year at art school, immediately it wasn't the staff, but other students treated you differently and actually became much nastier, more jealous. And we often, I could find myself going to Lou, tears coming down my face, because they were absolutely horrible. And I was saying to Andrew last night that in the year below me, there was one guy who was gay, and somebody in his year slashed his paintings. So, there was really very poor attitudes and that's, we're talking about the 1970, 69, 70 when this happened.
You see, I think that's an example, we have to finish here, but that's an example of you kind of ignoring the overwhelming odds that might have been against you, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, you had to,
But you're a survivor.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I didn't feel that I was put upon or put down. I think I was kind of strong enough, as you say, to overcome it.
Well, as indeed is the work. We're going to have to finish now.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say all 7 were survivors, I think, of the artists, and that is the important thing.
Yeah.
And go and see this exhibition. Honestly, it's worth climbing the stairs for. It's fabulous.
Scottish
Thanks
women can paint.
Yes, exactly. Let's hear it for Scottish women.